Welcome everybody. This is Excelsior Sheet Metal 101. My name is Dave Taylor and I'm the product manager for a lot of the Excelsior products. And what we're going to be talking about today is the Excelsior Edge. Now you may have seen it in some of our catalogs, build with the Excelsior Edge. That's a very important thing that we'll talk about a little bit later on to show all the associates why our sheet metal is the Cadillac of the sheet metal industry in the Chicagoland market. But first what we're going to talk about is a little bit of terminology, just so you get familiar with some of the terminology, because there's many different ways to call the same thing, just in case a contractor comes in and talks to you or wants something, so you'll know a little bit about the terminology. Then we're going to talk about the advantages of Excelsior and some of the disadvantages too, because you're going to need to know about that. The first thing we're going to talk about is grades, the grade of the sheet metal. I bet you if you ask a contractor what grade that he wants, he's going to look at you and think that you're crazy. But all sheet metal has different grades. And what the grade is the amount of zinc coating on the top or the bottom of the metal. Now most of the metal out there for inside use is grade 60. In other words, there's 30 thousandths of an inch coating on each side of the metal. But for some outdoor units you see on some large built-up air handlers, you might see grade 90. 90 is 45 thousandths of an inch of zinc on each side of the metal. Now obviously this is for corrosion resistance. The more zinc, the more corrosion resistance. There's also a 45,000 or grade 45, which is 22.5 thousandths of an inch on each side, but you won't see that very much. So that's grade. There's also a term called gauge. Now international standards have set up certain gauges. And the gauges always have ranges. Like you can see gauge 28 goes from 217 thousandths to 157 thousandths with the midpoint at 187 thousandths of an inch. 30 gauge goes from 187 thousandths down to 127 thousandths. And that's because when they take the hot metal and they roll it, sometimes there's a variance between the axis of the rollers, and they kind of move up and down. So that the international standards give a gauge for a range. And of course, as they go to 26 gauge, 24 gauge, and 22 gauge, that's thicker. So you got to think the smaller the number, the thicker the gauge. There's actually a 32 gauge over here that some of our competitors sell that we don't sell. We don't even make 32 gauge because there's too much scrap in the sheet metal, and it's basically like tin foil. But if somebody comes in and asks for warm air pipe, that's 32 gauge. So we just give them 30 gauge. Now, some more terminology. Now I'm going to grab my gloves, and it's always very important when you work with sheet metal. You always wear gloves. You may think, oh, I'll just grab it and I'll bring it out, but before you know it, your hands will be bloody. And I've had that happen to me many, many times. So I'm going to talk about rectangular elbows now. Alright? Ductwork is anything that's rectangular. Pipe is anything that's round. But this is a rectangular elbow. And this is what we call a vertical elbow because the air travels in the vertical dimension. Vertical dimension. Some people call this a shortway elbow. Okay? So it's called a shortway or a vertical elbow. This is a flatway elbow because the air travels in a horizontal direction or the flat direction like this. This happens to be a 45. I'll turn it on an angle like this. But the air travels in the horizontal direction. Alright? Always this width is the longest part in a flat way. Some people call this the easy way and the hard way because if you've ever made one, this is a very easy elbow to make. It's a very difficult elbow to make. But whenever you see the air travel in the horizontal dimension, that's called a flat way elbow. Or some people call it a Broadway elbow too. Anything that's round is called pipe. It's not round ductwork, it's pipe. So most contractors, most sheet metal guys call this pipe. Let's see here. This is a Scottie. This is used to do a takeoff on the top of ductwork. And we'll talk a little bit more about the Scottie a little bit later on. This is an elbow. Obviously it's an adjustable elbow. It's called an adjustable elbow because you can adjust it to many different angles like that. And that comes into play if you have a lot of angles you got to go around. This is a starting collar. You put this into the side of ductwork and you just bend up the collars like that to kind of secure it into the ductwork. But it starts the ductwork. You put in the round pipe here on this side. This is also called the small end. You can see the crimping here. If you see SE or small end, this is called a small end. This will fit inside the ductwork like this. If there's no crimping like this, you see no crimping here, they call that large end. So you might see it as LE in the catalog or in next trend, but that'll be LE for large end. So small end, large end, and they just kind of fit together like that. Now how they go together? This is an S cleat. You can see the S shape of it right there. That's an S cleat. And this is the drive cleat. Now what they do is they go together the S cleat would fit over the top like this, and of course you'd cut it down. Then you'd put another piece of ductwork in on this side. Drive cleat goes this way. Just slides up like this, and they just tap it up with a hammer, and then they pull the edges down like that. Now, a couple more terms. This is the joint right here. The seam goes right here. So if you talk to a contractor about the seam, this is the seam right here. That's the longitudinal side of the ductwork. This is the joint. There's another type of S cleat, and this is called a standing S cleat, and you can kind of see that. You can see this little S that's standing up here, and they use this for larger ductwork. It provides some more rigidity to it. So there's two types of S cleats. Now, another term is called a button lock. A button lock has these two little, or many little buttons here, punches, that when you put together on the seams, it snaps in like that. And this is called a Pittsburgh Scene. That's just the seam that they have here. You can see how the button locks would just snap in. I'm not going to snap it in because there's some disadvantages that we'll talk about in a second. We talked about warm air pipe. Now, Our ductwork instead of having button locks is hemmed right along here. You can kind of see if I turn it on its side, you can see that it's rolled over right there. Put that very close. You can kind of see that it's rolled over. It's not a sharp metal edge, but it's not a button lock. That's called a hemmed edge. And that edge is called the Excelsior edge, because not many people in the industry do that. It's more expensive. And we'll talk about why here in a second. Flat stock is another terminology that people use. Flat stock is just a flat piece of metal in a 4 by 8 or sometimes 3 by 8. You can buy it from us, but you can buy it a lot of different places. But flat stock, when somebody says flat stock, they mean just flat pieces of sheet metal. Most people buy fittings from us, but sometimes some shops make it themselves, and they want to buy flat stock from us too. There's another term called green lock seal. And what green lock seal is, you see this more in commercial ductwork, but in the pocket there of the Pittsburgh seam, they would put a sealer. So when they're making it, so the contractor doesn't have to put some tape or mastic coating along the outside, which is very labor intensive. So some people call it the green lock seal. This is also a boot. This is an end boot. It goes on the end of the ductwork. It goes on the end of the ductwork, and there's many different types of boots, angle boots, but this is an end boot here. But this would go up into the floor, and the contractor would just nail this up into the plywood on the floor, and you put your supplied diffuser on there. All right, a little bit about the advantages of Excelsior. The button lock, like we saw before, there are the buttons, is a very secure lock. If I put these two pieces together, the button lock is going to be very secure. Problem is, if the dealer has mismeasured it or if he put something together wrong, you can't get that button lock apart. I've got a piece of round duct here that's button locked. And if I pull that apart, I'd have to destroy this piece of pipe. I can't get that apart. So if I measured it wrong, or I didn't mean to put it together, or I used the wrong dimension, I either got to save that for something else, or I got to destroy that. Also, with the button lock, is this edge right here. You see, our edge was rolled over. This is a very sharp metal edge. And most of the guys out in the field don't wear gloves like this. So if you rub your hand across there, you're talking about a cut. And that's a workman's comp claim. So our competitors don't have that hemmed edge, that Excelsior edge. Also, this Excelsior edge right here, also when you put it together, it's a tighter fit at the seams, so there's less air leakage. But all you do is you just tap it out from the inside if you want that piece, if you want to take apart that piece of ductwork. Our ductwork on our round pipe, they call this a modified Reeves seam. You can see it a little bit there. There's the part that accepts the two modified Reeves seams, and you can see it kind of go together there. And when I put it together, just listen for it, you can hear it snap together. See, it's all together. If you heard the snap, I'll take it apart. All you have to do is press on it, and it comes apart like that. All right, try it one more time. You hear the snap? Some people call it a snap lock seam. And you can see it fits together very nicely. You just push it apart, and it comes apart like that. Going back to the Scottie, sometimes it's very difficult. This circle here is not the same dimension on each side. It's not like having an elbow where you can just go around with the elbow, and sometimes on the top of the ductwork you can't see much up there. So what we've done is we put two dimples here. Let me show you right here. There's one dimple up there, and you can see another dimple down there. So what a contractor will have to do is just take his scribe like this, and he can scribe the perfect circle that he needs for the ductwork, and then this fits on there, and these bend out like this to attach it to the top of the ductwork, and he's got his perfect circle. Because if you have an extra 1/4 of an inch around there, you're going to lose a lot of air, and that's the one thing you don't want to do. Elbows now. Elbows are much better construction. This is one of our competitors' elbows, and you can kind of see that overlap on that bead right there. Doesn't even go down to the bottom of the trough of the other side of the bead. You can kind of see it up there. You can kind of see it there too. It ends about halfway down the bead. You can kind of see that over here. Our elbow is overlapped all the way down to the bottom of the bead. You can see where it ends right there. Alright, so the overlap over the bead is much farther. Theirs come to about here. Ours goes all the way over the top. Now why you say that that's maybe a 1/16 of an inch? Well, what happens is that with our competitors, you go like this, and if there's a little bit of friction, this piece of the elbow will just pop right off, or it'll pop right off here. Or if you're up on a ladder and you're trying to put this in and you drop it, this elbow will shatter into different pieces, and the contractor will bring it back. With our elbows, that overlap is a much stronger fit, so it won't come out. One of the things that we have over our competitors too is those gauges. Remember I talked about some of the gauges a little bit before? If a contractor comes in and asks for 28 gauge, we're going to be in the upper part of this range of gauges. So we're going to have thicker ductwork. And we test about 1 every 200 samples to make sure we're in this thicker gauge. What our competitors might want to do is they can provide 30 gauge because you can see they're still in that same range, but 30 gauge ductwork is a lot less expensive. So you can see that if you shake some of our elbows and some of their elbows. All our ductwork is cross-broke ductwork. You can kind of see the diagonal breaking of one side of the ductwork. It goes like that. If I kind of move it around, you can kind of see the diagonal breaking. Our competitors don't have that. So what happens is when the fan starts up, it oil cans. And it's very annoying to a lot of people. A lot of contractors have had to come back and fix the oil canning noise. But our ductwork doesn't oil can. Our ductwork is always measured. We always check the measurements. put a piece of ductwork together like that, and you're off by 1/8 of an inch, that ductwork is going to look like that. Not going to be a perfect rectangle, it's going to be more like a trapezoid. So we always check our measurements. A lot of other competitors don't do that. Okay, just a brief summary of why Excelsior ductwork is better than the competition. First of all, it's got a hemmed edge here. All right? It's easier to put together than the button lock, and it's easier to come apart, so it saves time on installation or disassembly. It's got a rolled edge, or a hemmed edge, which means you don't cut yourself, so there's less time off and workman's comp claims. And this edge, this hemmed edge, snaps together a little bit more firmly and seats, so there's not as much leakage. Also, all the duct is cross broke, so there's less oil canning. The round pipe has the modified seam, a Reeves seam, and it fits together, it snaps together, but again, no button lock allows it to come apart very easily. The Excelsior elbows, the overlap on the joints is a lot longer. It overlaps more, so there's less air leakage, and it doesn't come apart when you turn it like this or if you drop it from the ladder. And it's also better quality of all the ductwork. And last, and certainly not least, is that it's made in the USA. Thank you for your time, and good luck selling.